The palace corridors echoed with urgent footsteps that morning. Guards moved with purpose, their armor clinking softly as they passed through the marble hallways. Something unusual was happening in the royal residence, and everyone could feel the tension in the air. The servants whispered to each other in corners, careful not to speak too loudly. Nobody knew exactly what was going on, but they all sensed that something significant was about to unfold. In a small chamber on the eastern wing of the palace, a 4-year-old boy sat on the floor playing with his wooden toys. Prince Alexander was the youngest member of the royal family, a tiny heir with bright blue eyes and golden curls that framed his innocent face. He had been moved to this room just 2 days ago, away from his usual quarters. His nanny told him it was because his regular room was being cleaned, but the little prince sensed something different. The way the adults looked at each other, the hushed conversations that stopped when he entered a room, and the extra guards posted outside his door all told him that something was wrong. Alexander was small for his age, but he was remarkably observant. He had learned early in life that sometimes adults forgot children could understand more than they thought. He watched everything carefully, storing away details that might become important later. His mother, the queen, had always praised his sharp mind. She often said he had the wisdom of someone much older, trapped in the body of a child. That wisdom was about to become crucial. The trouble had started 3 weeks earlier when a new advisor arrived at the palace. Lord Marcus Blackwood came with impressive credentials and letters of recommendation from distant kingdoms. He was tall and distinguished, with silver hair and a commanding presence. The king had welcomed him warmly, pleased to have such an experienced man join his council. But Alexander had felt uncomfortable from the first moment he saw Lord Blackwood. There was something about the way the man smiled that did not reach his eyes, something that made the little prince want to stay far away. Over the following weeks, Alexander noticed that Lord Blackwood was always around his father. The advisor had quickly become the king's most trusted confidant. He sat beside the throne during audiences, accompanied the king on walks through the palace gardens, and was present at every important meeting. Nobody seemed to question this rapid rise to power. Nobody except the tiny prince who watched from the shadows. Then, 5 days ago, Alexander had witnessed something strange. It was late evening, and he had woken up thirsty. His nanny was asleep in the adjoining room, so he decided to get water himself from the small fountain in the corridor. As he stepped out of his chambers, he saw Lord Blackwood standing in the shadows near the king's private study. The advisor was not alone. A hooded figure stood beside him, and they were speaking in low, urgent whispers. Alexander could not hear most of what they said, but he caught a few words that made his young heart pound with fear. The words were, "The king must not see the winter moon. Everything will be in place by then." The hooded figure handed Lord Blackwood a small vial, which glinted silver in the dim candlelight. The advisor tucked it into his robes quickly, then both men looked around nervously. Alexander pressed himself flat against the wall, holding his breath. He was small enough that the shadows hid him completely. After a moment, the hooded figure disappeared down a hidden staircase, and Lord Blackwood returned to his chambers. The little prince stood frozen for several minutes after they left. He knew what the winter moon meant. It was a royal term for the first full moon of winter, which was only 2 weeks away. His father had been planning a grand celebration for that night, inviting nobles from all the surrounding kingdoms. Whatever Lord Blackwood was plotting, it would happen during that celebration, and that small vial could only mean one thing: poison. Alexander wanted to run to his parents immediately, but something stopped him. He remembered stories his grandfather used to tell him before bedtime, stories about clever enemies who had spies everywhere, who could turn accusations back on innocent people. A 4-year-old boy claiming to have seen something suspicious would not be taken seriously. Adults might pat him on the head and tell him he had a vivid imagination. Worse, if Lord Blackwood had accomplices, telling the wrong person could put his entire family in danger. That night, Alexander barely slept. His mind raced with possibilities and plans. He thought about all the people in the palace who might help him. His mother was away visiting a neighboring kingdom and would not return until after the winter moon celebration. His father was completely under Lord Blackwood's influence and might not believe anything negative about his trusted advisor. The palace guards reported to the captain, who in turn reported to Lord Blackwood now. It seemed like every avenue was blocked. But then Alexander remembered someone who had always been kind to him, who had taught him how to read and write when he was barely 3 years old. Sir Edmund, the commander of the Royal Guard. Sir Edmund was an old soldier who had served the kingdom for 40 years. He had protected Alexander's grandfather during the border wars and had sworn an oath to protect the royal bloodline above all else. More importantly, Sir Edmund had been away inspecting the northern fortresses for the past month. He would return tomorrow, and he would not yet be influenced by Lord Blackwood's schemes. The tiny prince made his decision. He would find a way to warn Sir Edmund, but it had to be done carefully. Lord Blackwood had eyes everywhere in the palace now. Alexander could not simply walk up to the commander and speak to him. He needed to be clever. He needed to send a message that only Sir Edmund would understand. A message that could not be intercepted or misunderstood by the wrong people. As he finally drifted off to sleep that night, a plan began to form in his young but brilliant mind. Morning arrived with golden sunlight streaming through the palace windows. Alexander woke early, his mind already working through the details of his plan. He had to act naturally like any other day, so nobody would suspect that something was troubling him. During breakfast, he ate his porridge quietly while his nanny chatted about the day's lessons. She had no idea that the little prince was plotting something far more important than arithmetic or history. Sir Edmund was expected to return to the palace around midday. Alexander knew that the commander always stopped first at the royal stables to check on his horse before reporting to the king. This gave the young prince a small window of opportunity. But how could he get to the stables without arousing suspicion? A 4-year-old wandering around alone would immediately attract attention from the guards and servants who watched over him constantly. The answer came to him during his morning lessons. His tutor, Master Ferdinand, was teaching him about different birds in the kingdom. Alexander suddenly became very enthusiastic about the lesson, asking many questions about the pigeons that nested in the palace dovecote. Master Ferdinand was delighted by his interest and suggested they take a walk to observe the birds more closely. The dovecote was located near the stables. Perfect. As they walked through the palace grounds, Alexander kept up a steady stream of questions about pigeons. Master Ferdinand was so pleased with his student's curiosity that he did not notice when the little prince deliberately dropped his small leather notebook near the stable entrance. Alexander gasped and asked if they could retrieve it, claiming it was a gift from his mother. The kind tutor immediately agreed, and they walked toward the stables together. Just as they reached the notebook, Alexander heard the sound of hooves on cobblestones. Sir Edmund had arrived. The commander was a massive man with broad shoulders and a gray beard that reached his chest. His armor bore the scratches and dents of countless battles, and his eyes were sharp and watchful. When he saw the young prince, his stern face softened into a smile. Sir Edmund had always had a special fondness for Alexander, having been present at the boy's birth and sworn to protect him with his life. The timing could not have been better, but Alexander knew he had to be extremely careful. Master Ferdinand was standing right there, and several stable boys were working nearby. Any direct warning would be overheard and might reach Lord Blackwood's ears within minutes. The tiny prince needed to communicate his message in a way that only Sir Edmund would understand. He needed to use the secret language they had developed together during their private lessons. 6 months earlier, Sir Edmund had taught Alexander a special code. It was a game they played, the old soldier said, to help the young prince develop his memory and thinking skills. Each letter of the alphabet corresponded to a specific gesture or word. It had started as simple entertainment, but now Alexander realized it might have been Sir Edmund's way of preparing him for exactly this kind of situation. The commander had always been cautious, always thinking ahead. Alexander ran forward excitedly, as any child might upon seeing a beloved friend return from a long journey. He grabbed Sir Edmund's hand and began chattering about his lessons, about the pigeons, about everything and nothing. But as he spoke, his small fingers were moving against the commander's palm in specific patterns. Tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, pause, tap, tap, tap. Each combination meant something. Together they spelled out a message. Danger, Blackwood, poison, winter moon. Sir Edmund's expression did not change. He continued smiling down at the little prince, ruffling his golden curls affectionately. But Alexander felt the commander's hand tighten slightly around his own, acknowledging that the message had been received and understood. To anyone watching, it looked like a normal greeting between a soldier and a young child. Nobody could have guessed that a vital warning had just been passed between them. Master Ferdinand eventually reminded Alexander that they needed to return for the rest of the day's lessons. The young prince waved goodbye to Sir Edmund cheerfully, acting like nothing unusual had happened. As they walked back toward the palace, Alexander's heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone could hear it. He had done it. He had sent the covert message. Now everything depended on Sir Edmund believing him and taking action. The afternoon passed slowly for Alexander. He tried to focus on his lessons, but his mind kept wandering to what Sir Edmund might be doing. Was the commander investigating his claims? Had he confronted Lord Blackwood? Or worse, had Sir Edmund dismissed the warning as the imagination of a child? The uncertainty was almost unbearable. The little prince had to remind himself to act normally, to not give away that anything was troubling him. As evening approached, Alexander heard raised voices coming from the direction of his father's study. His nanny was preparing his dinner, so the young prince slipped out of his room quietly and crept down the corridor. He pressed his ear against the heavy wooden door of the study and listened. Inside he could hear the king's voice, Lord Blackwood's smooth tones, and Sir Edmund's deep rumble. They were arguing about something, but Alexander could not make out the exact words through the thick door. Suddenly the door opened and Alexander stumbled forward, nearly falling into the room. Lord Blackwood stood there looking down at him with cold eyes. For a moment the advisor's pleasant mask slipped, and Alexander saw pure hatred flash across his face. Then the smile returned and Lord Blackwood patted the boy's head patronizingly. The king called Alexander inside, asking what he was doing listening at doors. The young prince quickly made up a story about looking for his toy knight, which he had lost somewhere in the palace. His father seemed to accept this explanation, but Sir Edmund was watching Alexander carefully. The commander's eyes met the boy's for just a second, and Alexander saw something there that gave him hope. Sir Edmund believed him. The old soldier had seen enough deception in his long career to recognize truth when he heard it, even from a 4-year-old. He was taking the warning seriously. The tiny prince allowed his nanny to lead him back to his chambers, feeling slightly more confident than before. That night, Alexander could not sleep again. He lay in his small bed, staring at the ceiling and thinking about everything that had happened. He had sent his covert message successfully, and Sir Edmund had received it. But what would happen next? The winter moon celebration was still almost 2 weeks away. That gave them time to prepare, but it also gave Lord Blackwood time to adjust his plans if he suspected anything. The situation was delicate and dangerous, balanced on the edge of a knife. Around midnight, Alexander heard soft footsteps in the corridor outside his room. He held his breath, listening carefully. Someone was moving very quietly, trying not to be heard. The footsteps paused outside his door for a moment, and the young prince felt fear grip his heart. Was it Lord Blackwood, coming to silence the only person who knew about his plot? But then the footsteps moved on, fading into the distance. Alexander released his breath slowly, realizing that he had been holding it for almost a minute. Whatever was happening in the palace, it had begun. The game was now in motion, and there was no turning back. Sir Edmund spent the entire night after receiving Alexander's message thinking about the situation. The commander knew the young prince well enough to understand that the boy would not make up such a serious accusation. Alexander was mature beyond his years and remarkably observant. If he said he had witnessed something suspicious involving Lord Blackwood, then something was indeed wrong. But proving it would be another matter entirely. The advisor had positioned himself carefully over the past weeks, gaining the king's complete trust and loyalty. The old soldier had decades of experience dealing with palace intrigue and political conspiracies. He knew that one wrong move could alert the enemy and push them to act prematurely. He also knew that directly accusing Lord Blackwood without evidence would likely backfire. The king was completely under the advisor's influence now. Any accusation from Sir Edmund would be seen as jealousy or paranoia from an aging soldier who felt threatened by a younger, more sophisticated rival. Sir Edmund decided on a careful strategy. He would conduct a quiet investigation, gathering evidence without alerting Lord Blackwood or his potential accomplices. The commander had loyal men under his command, soldiers who had served with him for years and whose integrity was beyond question. He called 3 of these men to his private quarters in the early morning hours. Captain Reynolds, Lieutenant Morrison, and Sergeant Baker were all veterans who understood the value of discretion. Sir Edmund explained the situation carefully, Sharing what the young prince had communicated, the three soldiers listened with growing concern. They had all noticed changes in the palace since Lord Blackwood's arrival. Small things that individually meant nothing, but together formed a disturbing pattern. New guards had been hired, men with no ties to the kingdom or loyalty to the royal family. Important documents had gone missing from secure rooms. The king had become isolated, spending most of his time with Lord Blackwood and refusing counsel from his other advisors. Captain Reynolds volunteered to watch Lord Blackwood's movements throughout the day. He would coordinate with trusted guards to track where the advisor went and who he met with. Lieutenant Morrison took on the task of investigating the new guards who had been hired. He would check their backgrounds, find out where they came from, and determine if any of them had connections to foreign powers or criminal organizations. Sergeant Baker, who had connections with the palace servants, would listen for gossip and information from the kitchen staff, maids, and other workers who might have seen or heard something useful. Sir Edmund himself decided to focus on finding physical evidence. If Alexander was right about seeing a vial passed to Lord Blackwood, then that vial must still be somewhere in the advisor's chambers. The commander knew he needed to search those rooms, but it would be incredibly dangerous. Lord Blackwood was suspicious and clever. Any sign that his quarters had been disturbed would put him on guard and potentially accelerate whatever plan he had in motion. Over the next 3 days, the investigation proceeded carefully. Captain Reynolds reported that Lord Blackwood maintained a predictable daily schedule. Every morning he attended breakfast with the king. Then he spent 2 hours in the council chambers, followed by a walk in the garden before lunch. The afternoons were devoted to administrative work, and evenings were spent at formal dinners or private meetings. The only time his chambers would be unoccupied was during the morning council sessions. That would be Sir Edmund's opportunity. Lieutenant Morrison's discoveries were more troubling. 5 of the newly hired guards had falsified their references. They claimed to have served in the Northern Army, but when Morrison sent inquiries to the Northern garrison, no records of these men could be found. Even more suspicious, all 5 men had been personally recommended by Lord Blackwood. They were loyal to him, not to the kingdom or the royal family. Morrison also learned that these guards had been assigned to key positions: the king's private quarters, the treasury, and the palace gates. They controlled access to the most important areas. Sergeant Baker's information from the servants painted an equally concerning picture. The kitchen staff mentioned that Lord Blackwood had requested a private dining arrangement for the winter moon celebration. He wanted to personally oversee the preparation of the king's food that night, claiming it was a special gesture to honor His Majesty. The head cook found this request strange, as it was unprecedented for an advisor to involve himself in kitchen matters. But Lord Blackwood had been so insistent and persuasive that she had agreed. This information confirmed Alexander's warning. The winter moon celebration was definitely when Lord Blackwood planned to strike. He would use his access to the food preparation to administer the poison. The timing would be perfect. Hundreds of guests present, chaos and confusion when the king fell ill, and Lord Blackwood positioned to take control during the crisis. It was a well-planned conspiracy that would have succeeded if not for the observant eyes of a 4-year-old prince. On the 4th morning after receiving Alexander's message, Sir Edmund put his plan into action. He arrived at the council chambers early and positioned himself where he could see Lord Blackwood enter. As expected, the advisor arrived precisely on time, greeted the king warmly, and settled into his seat for the morning's discussions. Sir Edmund excused himself after 15 minutes, claiming he needed to review some documents about the northern fortresses. Nobody questioned his departure. The commander was known for his attention to detail and often left meetings to verify facts before offering opinions. Sir Edmund walked quickly, but not suspiciously, through the palace corridors. He had memorized the patrol routes of all the guards and knew exactly when each hallway would be empty. Lord Blackwood's chambers were on the 2nd floor, in a wing reserved for high-ranking nobles and advisors. 2 guards stood outside the door, but they were not among the suspicious new hires. They were loyal palace guards who had served for years. Sir Edmund approached them with his usual authority and told them he needed to inspect the room for security purposes before the winter moon celebration. The guards accepted this explanation without question. Inside, Lord Blackwood's chambers were elegant and well appointed. Expensive tapestries hung on the walls and heavy furniture filled the space. Sir Edmund moved swiftly but methodically, checking drawers, cabinets, and chests. He knew he had at most 30 minutes before the council session ended. His experienced hands searched efficiently, looking for hidden compartments or secret spaces where something might be concealed. For 20 minutes, he found nothing. Then his fingers detected a slight irregularity in the wooden paneling near the bed. Sir Edmund pressed carefully on the panel, and it slid aside to reveal a small hollow space. Inside was a leather pouch, and within that pouch was a glass vial containing a clear liquid. The commander's heart raced as he carefully removed the vial and held it up to the light. He had seen enough poisons during his long military career to recognize the distinctive shimmer of nightshade essence. This was a deadly toxin, tasteless and odorless when diluted properly. Just a few drops in wine or soup would be enough to kill a man within hours. The symptoms would appear to be a sudden heart failure, natural causes that would raise no suspicion. Sir Edmund carefully placed the vial back exactly as he had found it and closed the secret panel. He could not take the poison as evidence yet. If Lord Blackwood discovered it missing, he would know his plot had been uncovered and might flee or accelerate his timeline. The commander needed to catch him in the act, with witnesses present and no possibility of denial. He left the chambers as quietly as he had entered, nodding to the guards as he passed. His face remained calm and professional, but inside his mind was racing with plans and preparations. That evening, Sir Edmund met again with his 3 trusted men. He shared what he had found and what it meant. The conspiracy was real and immediate. They now had 9 days before the winter moon celebration. 9 days to prepare a counterplan that would expose Lord Blackwood and protect the king. The challenge was enormous. They had to move carefully, ensuring that Lord Blackwood suspected nothing while simultaneously positioning themselves to stop him at the critical moment. One mistake, one moment of carelessness, and either the king would die or Lord Blackwood would escape justice. The royal guard took position in ways that would not attract attention. Sir Edmund's strategy was brilliant in its simplicity. Rather than trying to convince the king of Lord Blackwood's betrayal beforehand, which would likely fail given the advisor's influence, they would catch him red-handed. The evidence would be undeniable, witnessed by multiple trusted observers. But achieving this required careful coordination and perfect timing. Every element had to fall into place exactly right, or the entire plan would collapse. Sir Edmund began by gradually repositioning his loyal guards throughout the palace. He did this subtly over several days, making it appear like routine rotation of duties. Captain Reynolds took personal command of the guard detail assigned to the kitchen and dining areas. Lieutenant Morrison arranged for his most trusted men to replace several of Lord Blackwood's suspicious guards at key positions. Sergeant Baker worked with the servants to establish a network of observers who could report any unusual activity immediately. Each piece was moved into place like chess pieces on a board. Alexander watched these preparations from his child's perspective, understanding more than most adults realized. The tiny prince noticed the subtle changes in the palace dynamics. He saw Sir Edmund's men appearing in new locations, recognized the careful way they positioned themselves near Lord Blackwood, without seeming to do so. The young boy felt both relieved and anxious. His warning had been taken seriously, but now everything depended on whether Sir Edmund's plan would work. The weight of responsibility felt heavy on his small shoulders. 5 days before the winter moon celebration, something unexpected happened. A messenger arrived from the Queen, announcing that she would return 2 days earlier than planned. She had cut short her diplomatic visit because she missed her family and wanted to help prepare for the celebration. This news delighted the king, but it created complications for both Sir Edmund and Lord Blackwood. The Queen was perceptive and not under the advisor's influence. Her presence would change the dynamic significantly. Alexander was overjoyed when his mother returned. The Queen swept into the palace like a ray of sunshine, bringing energy and warmth with her. She immediately noticed that something seemed off about the atmosphere. During her absence, the palace had become tense and quiet. The servants seemed nervous, and even the king appeared strained. When she asked her husband about it, he attributed it to the stress of planning the large celebration. But the Queen remained unconvinced. She had excellent instincts for detecting when something was wrong. That evening, the Queen visited Alexander's chambers to spend time with her son. She had missed him terribly during her travels and wanted to hear everything he had been doing. The little prince struggled with what to tell her. He desperately wanted to share the burden he had been carrying, to tell his mother about the danger threatening their family. But Sir Edmund had impressed upon him the importance of secrecy. The fewer people who knew about the plan, the less chance Lord Blackwood would discover it. Even the Queen could not be told, not yet. However, Alexander's mother was remarkably perceptive. She noticed the worry in her son's eyes, the way he seemed to be holding something back. She asked him gently if anything was troubling him. The young prince looked up at her with his bright blue eyes and said something carefully chosen. He told her that he had learned an important lesson about trust, and that sometimes the people who seem friendliest might not have good intentions. The Queen looked at her son thoughtfully, understanding that he was trying to tell her something important without breaking a promise. The next morning, Sir Edmund received an unexpected summons to meet with the Queen privately. He arrived at her chambers with some concern, wondering if Alexander had revealed too much. But the Queen's first words reassured him. She said she knew something was wrong in the palace and she trusted Sir Edmund to be handling it properly. She did not ask for details or try to interfere. Instead, she simply told him that she and her ladies-in-waiting would be extra vigilant during the celebration, and that she would ensure nothing happened to her son. The commander was grateful for her trust and discretion. Meanwhile, Lord Blackwood was becoming increasingly nervous. He had not expected the Queen to return early, and her presence complicated his plans. She was popular with the nobles and had strong alliances with neighboring kingdoms. If anything happened to the king while she was present, she would immediately take control as regent for the young prince. Lord Blackwood would need to eliminate her as well, which meant adjusting his strategy. The advisor spent long hours in his chambers, revising his plans and preparing contingencies. 2 days before the celebration, Lieutenant Morrison reported a significant development. One of Lord Blackwood's suspicious guards had been caught trying to bribe a palace servant for information about the royal family's private schedule. When confronted, the guard claimed he was simply curious, but his nervous behavior suggested otherwise. Morrison quietly detained the man for questioning. Under pressure, the guard admitted that he had been hired specifically to gather intelligence and report back to Lord Blackwood. He also revealed that there were others like him, though he did not know exactly how many. This confession confirmed what Sir Edmund had suspected. Lord Blackwood had been planning this conspiracy for months, carefully placing his people throughout the palace. The advisor was not working alone. He had a network of accomplices, possibly even outside the palace walls. This made the situation more dangerous, but also more urgent. If Lord Blackwood sensed that his guard had been compromised, he might accelerate his timeline or flee entirely. Sir Edmund made the difficult decision to keep the guard's arrest secret from everyone except his core team. He increased security around the detained man and prepared for the possibility that the conspiracy might unfold sooner than expected. The day before the winter moon celebration arrived with clear skies and cold winds. The palace was a flurry of activity as servants prepared for the grand event. Decorations were hung in the Great Hall, musicians rehearsed their performances, and cooks worked frantically in the kitchens to prepare the elaborate feast. Lord Blackwood moved through this chaos with apparent calm, supervising details and ensuring everything met his exacting standards. To any observer, he appeared to be simply a dedicated advisor, helping to organize an important royal event. But Captain Reynolds, watching from strategic positions, noticed something telling. Lord Blackwood made 3 separate visits to the kitchen that day, each time insisting on inspecting the food preparation personally. He claimed he wanted to ensure the quality met royal standards, but Reynolds observed that the advisor paid particular attention to the wine and soup that would be served to the king. During his 3rd visit, Lord Blackwood managed to dismiss the head cook briefly on a pretext and spent several minutes alone near the preparation area. Reynolds could not see exactly what he did, but the timing and behavior were highly suspicious. That evening, Sir Edmund gathered his team for a final briefing. Tomorrow would be the culmination of all their careful planning. The Royal Guard would be positioned throughout the celebration, watching Lord Blackwood's every move. The moment he attempted to poison the king's food or drink, they would intervene. Multiple witnesses would observe the act, making denial impossible. The king would finally see the truth about his trusted advisor. But everything had to happen perfectly. One mistake, one moment of hesitation, could mean the difference between saving the kingdom and watching it fall into the hands of a traitor. Alexander spent that evening unable to sleep once again. He lay in his bed, thinking about how his observation of that mysterious midnight meeting had set all of this in motion. Tomorrow would determine whether his warning had saved his father's life, or whether something would go wrong with the plan. The young prince said a silent prayer, asking for courage and wisdom for Sir Edmund and his men. Then he closed his eyes and tried to rest, knowing that tomorrow would be one of the most important days in the kingdom's history. The tiny heir had done his part by sending the covert message. Now it was up to the royal guard to finish what he had started. The winter moon rose over the palace like a silver coin against the dark sky. The celebration began at sunset with the great hall filled with nobles from across the kingdom and representatives from distant lands. Chandeliers sparkled with hundreds of candles. Musicians played elegant melodies, and the air was filled with the scent of expensive perfumes and roasted meats. It was a magnificent spectacle, the kind of event that people would talk about for years. But beneath the glittering surface, tension coiled like a snake ready to strike. The king and queen sat on their thrones at the head of the hall, dressed in their finest robes and crowns. Alexander stood beside his mother, wearing a small formal outfit that made him look like a miniature version of his father. The young prince scanned the room carefully, noting the positions of Sir Edmund's guards. They were scattered throughout the hall, looking like ordinary security but actually forming a careful network of observation. Captain Reynolds stood near the entrance to the kitchen corridor. Lieutenant Morrison was positioned by the main doors. Sergeant Baker mingled with the servants, keeping watch from that angle. Lord Blackwood arrived fashionably late, making a grand entrance that drew attention from all the guests. He was dressed in expensive black and silver robes that made him look powerful and sophisticated. He bowed deeply before the king and queen, expressing elaborate compliments about the wonderful celebration. The king welcomed him warmly, inviting him to sit at the high table close to the royal family. As Lord Blackwood took his seat, his eyes briefly met Alexander's, and the young prince saw something dark flash in them. The advisor knew the boy had been watching him for weeks, but he had no idea how much Alexander had seen or what had been set in motion. The feast progressed through multiple courses, each more elaborate than the last. Servants moved constantly between the tables and the kitchen, carrying platters of food and pitchers of wine. The guests ate and drank happily, celebrating the winter moon and enjoying the king's hospitality. Lord Blackwood participated in conversations, telling entertaining stories and making witty observations that kept the high table amused. He appeared completely relaxed and confident, but Sir Edmund, watching from his position near the wall, noticed that the advisor's eyes kept drifting toward the kitchen entrance. He was waiting for something. About 2 hours into the celebration, Lord Blackwood excused himself from the table. He claimed he needed to check on a special dessert he had arranged as a surprise for the king. The monarch smiled and told him not to be long, as the entertainment would begin soon. The advisor walked toward the kitchen corridor, moving with his usual grace and confidence. But the moment he passed through the doorway and out of sight of the main hall, his demeanor changed completely. His pleasant expression vanished, replaced by cold determination. He walked quickly toward the kitchen, not noticing that Captain Reynolds had begun following him at a careful distance. In the kitchen, organized chaos reigned as cooks and servants prepared the remaining courses. Lord Blackwood entered with authority, immediately commanding everyone's attention. He announced that he needed to personally inspect the king's wine before it was served. The head cook looked confused as the wine had already been tested and approved. But Lord Blackwood insisted, claiming he had received special instructions from the king himself. The servant stepped back uncertainly, unwilling to challenge someone with such obvious power and connection to the throne. Lord Blackwood moved to the preparation table, where an ornate golden chalice sat waiting to be filled. This was the special cup used only for the king during important ceremonies. The advisor picked up a crystal decanter of wine and began to pour it into the chalice slowly. His back was to most of the kitchen, and his body blocked clear view of what his hands were doing. But Captain Reynolds, who had positioned himself at the kitchen entrance, could see everything. He watched as Lord Blackwood's left hand slipped into his robes and emerged holding a small glass vial. The same vial that Sir Edmund had discovered hidden in the advisor's chambers. Time seemed to slow down as Lord Blackwood tilted the vial over the golden chalice. Clear liquid began to drip from the vial into the wine, mixing invisibly with the red liquid, the deadly nightshade poison that would kill the king within hours. Captain Reynolds raised his hand in a prearranged signal. Throughout the kitchen and the adjacent corridors, Sir Edmund's guards sprang into action. They had been waiting for this exact moment, positioned to respond instantly. 6 armed men rushed into the kitchen from different directions, surrounding Lord Blackwood before he could react. The advisor froze, the vial still in his hand, his arm extended over the poisoned chalice. There was no way to deny what he had been doing. The evidence was literally in his grasp. For a moment his face showed pure shock as he realized he had been caught. Then that shock transformed into rage. He spun around looking for an escape route but found himself completely surrounded. Captain Reynolds stepped forward, his sword drawn, and spoke in a voice loud enough for all the kitchen staff to hear clearly. The captain announced that Lord Blackwood was under arrest for conspiracy to murder the king. The kitchen servants gasped in horror, backing away from the scene. Some of them began crying, realizing how close they had come to serving poisoned wine to their beloved monarch. Lord Blackwood's eyes darted around desperately. He still held the vial of poison, and for a terrible moment it seemed like he might try to use it as a weapon or even drink it himself. But Lieutenant Morrison moved forward quickly and knocked the vial from his hand. It fell to the stone floor and shattered, the deadly liquid spreading across the ground. Guards seized Lord Blackwood and bound his hands with iron chains. The advisor struggled briefly but was overpowered quickly. As they restrained him, Sir Edmund entered the kitchen with measured steps. The old commander looked at the man who had nearly succeeded in destroying the kingdom. For a moment their eyes met, and Lord Blackwood seemed to understand that he had been outmaneuvered. Someone had been watching him all along, anticipating his moves, waiting for him to reveal himself completely. The advisor's face twisted with bitter anger as he realized his elaborate plan had failed. Sir Edmund ordered Captain Reynolds to take Lord Blackwood to the dungeon cells and post a heavy guard. The prisoner would be held there until formal charges could be brought before the king, and a trial arranged. As the guards dragged the advisor away, he began shouting threats and accusations. He claimed he was being falsely arrested, that this was a conspiracy against him by jealous rivals. But his protests fell on deaf ears. Everyone in the kitchen had witnessed what he had done. The evidence was undeniable and overwhelming. After securing the prisoner, Sir Edmund turned his attention to gathering evidence. He ordered the poisoned wine carefully preserved in sealed containers. The shattered vial pieces were collected from the floor. Multiple witnesses from the kitchen staff were identified and would give formal statements later. The commander wanted to ensure that when this case went to trial, there would be absolutely no doubt about Lord Blackwood's guilt. Every detail had to be documented perfectly. The kingdom's justice system would need to see overwhelming proof before condemning a man who had been so close to the king. Meanwhile, in the Great Hall, the celebration continued without interruption. The guests had no idea what drama had just unfolded in the kitchen. They laughed and talked and enjoyed the music, completely unaware that their king had just narrowly escaped assassination. Sir Edmund decided to let the celebration continue for now. Breaking the news in the middle of the event would cause panic and chaos. Better to handle the situation quietly and inform the king privately after the guests had departed. The secret of what had happened would be contained until the proper time to reveal it. Alexander noticed when Sir Edmund briefly appeared at the hall entrance and nodded toward the queen. It was a subtle gesture that most people missed, but the young prince understood its meaning. The plan had worked. Lord Blackwood had been caught and arrested. His father was safe. The tiny heir felt an enormous weight lift from his shoulders. For weeks he had carried the burden of this terrible knowledge, watching and waiting and hoping that his warning would be enough. Now it was over. The covert message he had sent to Sir Edmund had saved the kingdom. The royal guard had taken position against the suspect and stopped him at the crucial moment. Justice would be served. The winter moon celebration ended near midnight with guests departing in high spirits, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded behind the scenes. After the last noble had left the palace, Sir Edmund requested an urgent private audience with the king and queen. The royal couple could tell from the commander's serious expression that something important had happened. They followed him to the private council chamber, bringing Alexander with them at Sir Edmund's specific request. The young prince would need to be part of this conversation, as his role in the events was central to everything. Sir Edmund began his explanation methodically, laying out the facts in careful order. He described how the young prince had observed suspicious activity involving Lord Blackwood weeks earlier. He explained the covert message Alexander had sent and why he had chosen to investigate quietly, rather than bring immediate accusations. The commander detailed the evidence his team had gathered, the falsified references of the hired guards, the suspicious interest in food preparation, and the discovery of the hidden poison vial. Finally, he described what had happened in the kitchen just hours ago, when Lord Blackwood had attempted to poison the king's wine. The king listened to this account in stunned silence. His face went through a range of emotions: disbelief, shock, anger, and finally a deep sadness. The man he had trusted completely, the advisor he had welcomed into his closest circle, had been planning to murder him. It was a betrayal so profound that the king struggled to process it. He asked Sir Edmund several times if there could be any mistake, any possibility of misunderstanding. But the commander's evidence was overwhelming. Multiple witnesses had seen Lord Blackwood add poison to the chalice. The physical evidence had been preserved. There was no room for doubt. The queen reached out and took her husband's hand, offering silent support. She had suspected something was wrong, but never imagined the threat was this severe. Her eyes moved to Alexander, who stood quietly beside his mother's chair. The tiny prince looked small and vulnerable in his formal clothes, but his expression showed a maturity beyond his years. The queen realized that her 4-year-old son had carried the weight of this knowledge alone for weeks, unable to share his burden with anyone except Sir Edmund. She pulled Alexander into a tight embrace, whispering words of praise for his courage and quick thinking. The king asked to see the evidence personally. Sir Edmund had anticipated this and brought everything to the council chamber. The sealed containers with the poisoned wine, fragments of the broken vial, written statements from the kitchen witnesses, and documentation about the suspicious guards. The monarch examined each piece carefully, his face growing darker as the reality of the situation became undeniable. When he finally looked up, tears glistened in his eyes. He had been completely deceived, his judgment clouded by Lord Blackwood's charisma and apparent loyalty. His own son had seen the truth that he had missed. The king rose from his chair and walked over to Alexander. He knelt down so they were at eye level, a remarkable gesture from a monarch who rarely showed such humility. He looked into his son's bright blue eyes and spoke words that everyone in the room would remember forever. He told Alexander that he had saved not just his father's life, but the entire kingdom. His observation and courage had prevented a catastrophe that could have plunged the realm into chaos. The king said he was proud beyond measure to have such a son, and that Alexander had proven himself worthy of the crown he would one day inherit. Over the following days, the full extent of Lord Blackwood's conspiracy was revealed through careful investigation. The detained guards, facing serious charges themselves, provided information in exchange for reduced sentences. Lord Blackwood had indeed been working with foreign enemies who wanted to destabilize the kingdom. The plan was to assassinate the king during the winter moon celebration, when the palace was filled with foreign dignitaries. The confusion and chaos following the king's death would have allowed Blackwood's accomplices to seize control of key positions. The advisor himself would have declared himself regent, claiming to act in the young prince's best interests, while actually serving the foreign powers who had hired him. The trial of Lord Blackwood became one of the most significant legal proceedings in the kingdom's history. The evidence against him was presented before a court of senior nobles and judges. Witnesses testified about what they had seen. The poison was analyzed by royal physicians who confirmed it was indeed nightshade essence, a deadly toxin that would have killed the king within hours while appearing to be natural heart failure. Lord Blackwood's defense attorneys argued passionately, but they could not overcome the overwhelming evidence. The guilty verdict was unanimous, delivered without a single dissenting voice. Lord Blackwood was sentenced to life imprisonment in a remote fortress, where he would spend his remaining years separated from society. The king chose this punishment rather than execution, believing it showed both justice and mercy. The advisor's accomplices received varying sentences based on their level of involvement. The guards who had knowingly participated in the conspiracy were banished from the kingdom. Those who had been deceived or coerced were given opportunities to prove their loyalty through continued service. The foreign powers behind the plot were identified, and diplomatic relations with those kingdoms were severely restricted. In the aftermath of these events, significant changes were made to palace security and procedures. Sir Edmund was given expanded authority to investigate and vet all new appointments to positions of power. A new system was established for testing food and drink before it reached the royal family. Additional protocols were created for monitoring the activities of advisors and nobles with access to the king. These reforms would protect future generations from similar conspiracies. The kingdom had learned a valuable lesson about the importance of vigilance and the dangers of blind trust. The king also made personal changes in how he governed. He had learned the hard way that surrounding himself with a single trusted advisor was dangerous. From that point forward, he sought counsel from multiple sources and encouraged debate and disagreement among his advisors. He spent more time listening to people at all levels of the palace hierarchy, from senior nobles down to servants and guards. He recognized that wisdom could come from unexpected sources, as his own son had proven. The king became a better ruler because of this experience, more thoughtful and less susceptible to manipulation. Alexander's role in preventing the conspiracy became widely known throughout the kingdom, though the details were carefully controlled to protect the young prince's privacy. The people celebrated him as a hero, the tiny heir whose sharp eyes and brave heart had saved the throne. Songs were written about his courage. Artists created paintings depicting the moment he sent his secret message to Sir Edmund. The story became part of the kingdom's history, told and retold to inspire future generations about the importance of observation, courage, and speaking truth to power regardless of age or station. Sir Edmund was honored for his wisdom in taking the young prince's warning seriously and for his brilliant execution of the plan to catch Lord Blackwood in the act. The king awarded him the highest military decoration the kingdom could bestow and granted him lands and titles befitting his service. But the old commander valued something else even more, the knowledge that he had fulfilled his oath to protect the royal bloodline. He had trusted a 4-year-old boy when others might have dismissed the concern, and that trust had made all the difference. It was perhaps his finest moment in a career filled with distinguished service. In the years that followed, Alexander grew into a remarkable young man. The experience of uncovering and helping to stop the conspiracy had shaped his character in profound ways. He learned that leadership meant being observant, thinking carefully before acting, and having the courage to stand up for what was right even when it was difficult. He developed a deep appreciation for the loyalty and dedication of people like Sir Edmund, Captain Reynolds, and the other guards who had risked everything to protect the kingdom. These lessons would serve him well when he eventually became king himself. The bond between Alexander and Sir Edmund grew even stronger after these events. The commander continued to train the young prince in matters of strategy, observation, and leadership. They would often sit together in the palace gardens discussing philosophy, history, and the responsibilities of power. Sir Edmund taught Alexander that being a good ruler meant more than sitting on a throne and giving orders. It meant being willing to see uncomfortable truths, to question what seemed obvious, and to trust that wisdom could come from unexpected sources. The tiny heir who had sent the covert message grew into a wise and just leader. The story of how a 4-year-old prince saved the kingdom became one of the most stirring tales in the realm's history. It reminded everyone that greatness could emerge from the most unlikely places, that age did not determine wisdom or courage, and that paying attention to small details could prevent great disasters. The tale was told in schools to teach children about the importance of observation and speaking up when they witnessed wrongdoing. It was shared in military academies to emphasize the value of taking all intelligence seriously, regard